States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
No one wants to shut the government down, and we are governing, doing the responsible thing as Republicans.
It's a great privilege to study in this country, but when we give you that right to study in this country, don't violate our laws.
Hello everyone, I'm Major Garrett in Washington, back from a brief trip to Los Angeles. It's good to be back here with you. Tonight on America Decides, economic anxieties. President Trump holds a roundtable with technology CEOs and signs new executive orders. That's not what you're seeing there. We'll get to that in a minute. But one thing he did not do today is what he did on Air Force One last night, which is rule out a possible recession. The Dow today shed nearly 900 points as tariffs, mounting layoffs, and sagging consumer confidence all conspired to weigh down on economic perceptions. Adding to this uncertainty, the potential for another showdown over government funding here in Washington. There's no deal by Friday night. The nation is looking at a partial federal government shutdown, which could have significant implications for millions of Americans. I want to start tonight with Weijia Jiang at the White House, Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. So, Weijia, I want to play you some sound that I know you're familiar with, but our audience might be catching up with. What President Trump said aboard Air Force One last night coming back to Washington, and what his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said today about the prospects of an economic recession. Let's listen.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America.
Should Americans brace for a recession?
Absolutely not. Anybody who bets against Donald Trump, it's like the same people who thought Donald Trump wasn't a winner a year ago. Donald Trump is a winner. He's going to win for the American people. That's just the way it's going to be.
So, Weijia, what is the sense of things today?
Well, surprisingly, we haven't heard or seen from President Trump today, even though he woke up here at the White House, and we often have seen him during his first 50 days in office. But I can tell you that the White House has sent out a statement to say what we're seeing on Wall Street is a strong divergence between, quote, short-term animal spirits of the market and what we're actually seeing unfold from businesses and business leaders. They point to confidence among CEOs and small business owners and manufacturing sector. But Major, here's what's important. The president's message actually has been pretty consistent over the past couple weeks when he was asked about waiting for his economic policies to be implemented. Even during his joint session, address to a joint session of Congress, he said there's going to be a disturbance. There might be a little adjustment period. But I think people want to know, what does that mean for me? What disturbance? How much money are we talking about? How long is there going to be a disturbance? And even when he was asked about the recession and then later on about the possibility of inflation increasing, he said, essentially, things happen. These things take time. And that's very different, Major, from what we heard on the campaign trail when he didn't talk about the fact that there might be a period of pain in order to make gains. He said on day one, I will lower the prices. He still insists that this is the road to take in order for there to be a big structural change in the U.S. economy. But in terms of how Wall Street is reacting, we're not getting much from the president today, Major.
And the president's remarks were to Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business News about the potential for a recession. That was Howard Lutnick on Meet the Press yesterday. And yet, Weijia, the White House has to acknowledge the following. All of the stock market gains, which were achieved and pointed to with great pride by President-elect Trump the day after the election, have all been given back. And market indices are bets on the future, not the present. And that seems to be at least some kind of verdict about the volatility that the tariff conversation continues to inject in the U.S. economy.
Yes, Major, and that's because it's not only tariffs on foreign imports. We are now seeing today, of course, China's retaliatory tariffs kick in on American exports. And, you know, we've been talking so much about Beijing, Canada, and Mexico. The fact is, on April 2nd, in just about 3 weeks, the administration is planning to implement blanket tariffs for a long list of countries, Major, a list that we are still waiting for, that will not be divided like you see on your screen, which is by sector. There will just be a rate for all goods from that country, because the administration claims it's in response to tariffs that are in place already on U.S. goods. What we don't know, Major, is, how those countries are going to respond. And it's probably not just going to be saying, OK, we get it. This is your response. We're expecting even more tariffs. And that's why global economists are so concerned that when you have this tit for tat, not only with 3 countries, but with many countries, it could really shake up the U.S. and the global economy.
Nicole Killian, turning to you on Capitol Hill. So we have 2 dimensions of uncertainty to begin this week. One, the uncertainty of what this tariff clash will or will not create economically, and the uncertainty about financing in full the federal government for the remainder of the fiscal year. You take them in whichever order you prefer.
Well, again, it just adds more uncertainty into the mix. Obviously, certainly markets are watching what's happening here on Capitol Hill as well, as we are just a few days away from a Friday deadline to fund the government. Now, Speaker Johnson has made clear that he has a plan, that he thinks he has the votes to get it through, which is this year-long continuing resolution. But this time around, he's unlikely to get much support from Democrats in the House, and it's unclear, even if it clears the House, if Senate Democrats are going to put up the votes necessary to get this over the finish line. So there's still a lot of question marks there. And, in terms of the president's tariff policy, I think a lot of lawmakers have continued to take a wait-and-see approach. Certainly many lawmakers, particularly those from agriculture states or states along the border that are more impacted by this, are watching what's happening closely. By and large, even the speaker himself has said certainly that the president doesn't want a trade war here. But that being said, it is starting to have an impact on some of these districts and some of these states. And so lawmakers are watching very cautiously what is happening, trusting that the president's policies will eventually work, but at the same time, hoping that there is not too much a long-term pain in terms of trying to administer his economic policies.
Nicole, you mentioned House Speaker Mike Johnson. I want to play some sound from him today expressing confidence about resolving what looks like a possible impasse over federal government funding. Let's listen.
The CR will pass.
What if it gets blocked?
I don't think it's going to get blocked.
What makes you so confident that it will pass?
Because no one wants to shut the government down, and we are governing, doing the responsible thing as Republicans. It's going to be up to Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats to do the right thing, and I don't think they're going to shut the government down.
So, Nicole, we all know the Washington parlance, but our audience may want to catch up on a CR. That's for a continuing resolution. That's to keep everything funded. Do lawmakers share the Speaker's sense of confidence that this is going to be averted?
Well, again, I feel like covering these spending fights over the years, the proof is always in the pudding. I mean, I will point back to the last continuing resolution where it took 3 attempts to try to get something cleared. So anything can happen. But look, the speaker knows that this time around he may not get that Democratic support. And so he is and has been, and his team for that matter, working to try to get Republicans on board. For instance, we saw some members of the House Freedom Caucus meet last week with the president, who has supported this bill and is kind of trying to push them and prod them that this is the best thing to do to try to advance his agenda. At the same time, of course, many Democrats continue to argue that a shutdown benefits no one, so they are going to have to make some tough decisions in the days ahead.
Who's going to own a shutdown if there is one? Always the operative political question. Weijia Jiang and Nicole Killian getting us off to a great start this Monday. Thanks so very much.
And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
Canada's new leader comes out swinging, at least rhetorically, his message to President Trump as the country's largest province hits the United States with an electricity surcharge. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Canada's next prime minister is pledging to take on President Trump. Former central banker Mark Carney was elected leader of the ruling Liberal Party. This as Mr. Trump imposes tariffs and again, seems to threaten to turn Canada into America's 51st state. Carney is not taking this, as was evident in his speech last night.
We didn't ask for this fight. We didn't ask for this fight. But Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves. So the Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win.
Ed O'Keefe and Chanel Call join us now. Ed O'Keefe is in Ottawa. Chanel is on our Studio 57 in New York. Ed, who is Mark Carney? He has a rather long history, a kind of storied history economically in Canada, stepping into an enormously important role when Canada needs and wants to push back.
I thought we were renaming the show for these few minutes Canada Decides.
Canada Decides. I think go right ahead, Ed.
Good to see. All right. Look, Mark Carney is a Harvard-educated economist who once worked for Goldman Sachs, has spent, obviously, a fair amount of time in the United States, so understands the U.S.-Canada relationship. As you point out, was head of Canada's central bank, also ran the Bank of England around the time Brexit was being voted on and taking effect. So he's got real good, solid understanding of the global economy and the effects of things like tariffs. Walloped his competition in this race for head of the Liberal Party last night with 85% of the vote, and will take the mantle from Justin Trudeau at some point later this week and become prime minister. The question at that point is, well, for how long will he be prime minister? Because he's got to call a general election anytime between the moment he becomes prime minister and October, essentially. There's some speculation here in Canada's capital. He may call it right away because his Liberal Party is catching back up to the Conservatives after they had a nearly double-digit advantage earlier this year before the president started threatening tariffs and annexing Canada, which has just infuriated Canadians all across this country with that kind of talk, and as they realize that he's getting quite serious, at least, about the tariffs.
And Chanel, for the purposes of this segment, it is Canada Decides. Ontario has decided to impose a 25% increase on electricity exports to the United States. You spoke with that province's energy minister. How much of an impact will all this have on the states targeted by this particular increase?
Well, Ontario officials, Major, say that this will impact about 1.5 million Americans in those three bordering states. So we're talking about Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. They are saying this will cost the U.S. about $400,000 each day. That 25% surcharge is put in place. Now, I spoke to the minister earlier today, and he said he hopes it will financially impact those Americans in those three bordering states, especially those who voted for Trump, to fix the economy. Listen.
We want to make clear we actually have a great sense of love and affection for the American people. We share the values and the same democratic aspirations. So it's very regrettable we're here, and there's only one person, one man that can be blamed for the situation we are in, and that is President Trump.
So I asked Minister Stephen Lecce, what is the goal here? He says, look, we just want to renegotiate that USMCA deal, which, Major Ed, you'll remember, was signed by President Donald Trump.
To that point, Ed, do the Canadians you've had a chance to talk with assume there is a way out of this rhetorical impasse before it becomes a full-blown trade and economic confrontation?
They're essentially waiting for the United States to blink, Major, because in their view, they will back off these electricity tariffs. The Premier of Ontario today also once again didn't rule out cutting off the electricity entirely to the United States as a potential response. All of it would stop, however, if President Trump backs off. There is no indication that's going to happen anytime soon, at least from the White House. So, in essence, then this is going to continue. And this country especially is getting ready for that. A big concern, for example, about steel workers in parts of this country, concerns about what it'll mean for the everyday consumer who is increasingly trying to buy local or buy Canadian, and anticipating price increases on some goods, and concerns, of course, about the auto sector, the auto parts sector, and whether the oil and gas industry in this country, especially in Alberta, might consider holding back at some point the supply that goes into the United States every day. There's even talk here during this election season about focusing less on building pipelines to the south and perhaps focusing on building pipelines to the east and west so that this country itself can take more advantage of what it's been selling to the United States and maybe even ship it out in other directions to the rest of the world. So, you know, their bottom line up here is this: the moment President Trump drops this for good, we're good. But until then, or unless that happens, some kind of retaliation will continue to occur.
And Janelle, let the audience know what's next with this electricity conversation. Could it bleed into other energy sectors as well?
Well, at this point, Ontario officials have said, Major, 25% could increase if they don't see some kind of negotiation take place soon. I asked, we didn't get really a clear timeline on this, but as Ed mentioned as well, cutting off energy entirely is not off the table. So I asked Minister Stephen Lecce today, what would happen if America just got its energy elsewhere? Here's what he said.
If you're not buying them from democratic Canada, then you're going to have to buy them from despotic regimes abroad, be it from Putin or from China or from other authoritarian regimes who do not share our strategic geopolitical interests and democratic values. So I want to believe that cooler heads will prevail.
And really notable to mention, Major, that Ontario officials are saying this particular retaliatory tariff on the energy sector will probably go beyond just those 3 states that they started with targeting, again, Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, because they say a lot of those states will take that Canadian energy and then upsell it to other parts of the country.
Ed O'Keefe in Ottawa, Chanel Call in New York. Thank you for putting together this Canada Decides segment. Too safe. Former vice presidential candidate and nominee Tim Walz of the Democratic Party talks about the 2024 race, what he's saying about what the Democrats did wrong. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. If you're a Democrat, you might say to yourself, now he tells us, and if you're a Republican, you might say to yourself, wouldn't matter anyway. What am I talking about? Well, Minnesota Governor, former vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, is unburdening himself about what he thinks Democrats could have done and should have done better in 2024. He told Politico, quote, this is a long one, so pay attention. In football parlance, we were in a prevent defense, Walz said, to not lose when we never had anything to lose because I don't think we were ever ahead, unquote. Joining us now to discuss and diagram, Joel Payne and Michael LaRosa. Joel is a CBS News political contributor, Michael, and Democratic strategist. Michael served as press secretary for First Lady Joe Biden. Michael, I want to ask you about that, Walz's characterization, and also the conversation going on here in Washington about books that are going to come out and allegations that are going to be made that the White House and the re-election campaign buried the infirmities of President Biden to its detriment and to the country's detriment.
Yeah, look, I wasn't there for the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, I did think that they should start taking the polling that showed a lack of support for the president in his own party very seriously.
The re-election and the White House.
The re-election bid, and I did not think that by denying the polling, denying the data, denying the journalism, they were also denying how the public felt about the president's age and how severe of an issue it was. And I think it's demonstrated by Senator Jack Reed, who, as you know, doesn't make noise.
No.
When he requested that the president take 2 mental acuity tests and share the results. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't like drama. He's known the president for 30 years. And by that point, it was too late, and all the benefit of the doubt for the president and his campaign was lost.
Did you ever witness anything that troubled you about the president's abilities?
I worked with, for them, for the First Lady in the traveling bubble, as it's called, for 3 years, the campaign and the first 2 years at the White House. And I've always been consistent. That has never been my experience. Whether they misread their mandate in 2022 after the midterms is another story. And that's up to their, that's a call for the strategist, and they should take responsibility for what they did and didn't see in the data at the time.
Quickly, Tim Walz says they were never ahead and they should have played more aggressively.
Well, he's absolutely right. And the part about the Bidens and Tim Walz, it's all connected. We need to start having these uncomfortable conversations early and honestly, because this is why we're in the position we are in, because we didn't have them early enough. Governor Walz is exactly right. I mean, this is a guy right out of central casting. He was a vet, he was a teacher, he was a coach, a Midwestern governor. He campaigned and auditioned for the job because he could communicate and relate to people through the prism of television. And they did the opposite. They took their asset and they, I don't know, muzzled and locked it up and chained it up into a basement. We never saw them again. And so I don't know why. It's mysterious and baffling to me why they decided to not use their asset strengths to their advantage.
And turned the governor into a cautious, I agree with Vice Presidential nominee Vance in the debate.
Yeah, you started with that football metaphor that the governor used. In the football parlance right now, Democratic Party is a team that just had a really bad year with high expectations and is rebuilding. And the things that you're seeing right now, the conversation we're having, all the talk in all the favorite newspapers that we trust is going to be about what went wrong. They're fair. The critiques are fair. I have said to you, I've said to our colleague John Dickerson and others, I thought Joe Biden's age would not be an impediment for him so long as it did not affect his ability to do the job. I was wrong about that. I think the American people made a different judgment than I did and that a lot of strategists did. I think combined with the fact that the Democratic Party is maybe losing the thread on the conversation that's happening outside of D.C. with the rest of the country, which, by the way, I think that it's good and it's useful that the party has rebounded and has started to understand those shortcomings. I think that's where we are right now.
To Michael's point, it's always been something I've observed that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you ignore bad news, you are taking a tremendous risk, especially if that bad news keeps showing up in your data.
Yeah, especially also if bad news plays into preconceived notions. I worked for John Edwards, right? And there was the whole thing about him being the wealthy trial lawyer that you can't trust. And then guess what happens? He goes and has an affair on his cancer-stricken wife and lies about it, right? And it's not just that he did the bad thing, it's that he did the bad thing that people were already predisposed to thinking he was capable of doing. Or
suspicious about.
And to the point about Biden, it's not just that he showed his wares in that debate and that he clearly slowed down publicly. It's that it played into a narrative about a country losing faith in their leader, losing faith in his ability to be a dynamic spokesperson for what he believed in. And I think, unfortunately, Democrats weren't able to break the cycle. Kamala Harris was a really good candidate who had an opportunity to do that. She couldn't break away from the Biden-Harris legacy enough in a quick amount of time.
But Major, we also have to be realistic and pragmatic, but also, honest that we had a problem at the top of the ticket, but in 6 out of the 7 swing states, they chose Democrats right after that. In Arizona, Nevada,
in the Senate races.
Minnesota, the Senate races, the governor's race in North Carolina. If you go down, if you look at the North Carolina ballot of statewide officials down to the superintendent, Democrats won all of those races. So we had a problem at the top of the ticket, but we fared very well with women candidates and Latino candidates at the top.
Let's go to something that is often perceived about the fortress family, Biden.
Yes.
That it's very hard to penetrate, and it is kind of insular, and it talks to itself in reassuring ways. Indifferent probably at its peril to certain political signals that it should have absorbed. True?
Yeah, I'd say that's true.
By the way, not uncommon for any politician, right?
But especially so. It feels, and there's a perception that it's especially so with fortress Biden family.
In this case, it did. Well, the family, first of all, it is
led by Jill.
It is Jill Biden's job as his spouse, not as his political advisor, to love and support and encourage him to keep going. There's a lot of also PTSD from 1987 where they were forced out before. And that left a lot of scars. He didn't run for president for 20 years after that. But as the spouse, as his children, his child and grandchildren, it's their job to encourage him. It is his inner circle's job, the political advisors, to give him the bad news. And again, going back to the Jack Reed story, according to the Washington Post reporting, he was unaware of what Senator Reed had said in the meeting with senators, and Schumer was shocked that he was shocked. And I think that exemplified the problem we had.
Color me unsurprised that a politician who is the president, who's been trying to be president for 50 years, the inertia of holding on the power, that's as old as day in politics. And so that's not very surprising to me.
Joel Payne, Michael LaRosa, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. China's retaliatory tariffs take effect today on several important U.S. farm products. Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady is standing by with more from New York. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. U.S. talks took a beating today as economic concerns, at least in the market, seem to escalate. This comes after President Trump declined to rule out the possibility that a recession might happen in the not-too-distant future. Didn't say it would, but didn't rule it out. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins me now from New York. Kelly, it's always good to have you with us. So the Dow down 2%, the NASDAQ tech-heavy NASDAQ down 4%, S&P broader economy down 2.7%. high volatility. There was an attempt late in the session to claw back some gains, but it never really materialized. A tough day.
It really was, Major. And by the way, this is a day that follows a week last week of roller coaster activity. You and I talked about it at length. And really, this is all about uncertainty. What sectors are going to have tariffs on them? What countries are going to have tariffs on them? How are businesses and consumers going to react to that? And the fact that the president declined to say that, no, we wouldn't have a recession really spurred what we saw today. And, you know, you look at some of the indicators, consumer confidence is down, investor sentiment is down, and that really is why you saw such a big sell-off, because we don't know what is going to happen here, what businesses are going to do, and how consumers are going to react.
And how businesses that had investment plans, had M&A plans, merger and acquisition plans, are they all on hold? And if things are on hold, what does that mean?
That's right. I think especially the banking sector, you really saw take a hit today because there was such a hope following the election that there was going to be this boom in economic activity and M&A activity. And really this question of a recession, which we had a graphic up a second ago, and I'll kind of run you through. I want to say we are not in a recession yet, though admittedly you never know you're in a recession until you've already been in a recession. But look, negative GDP growth, 2 quarters of that in a row, that's the definition of a recession. We haven't seen that yet. Sharp rise in unemployment, we haven't seen that yet. But the 3 that you see there on the bottom of the screen, declining personal income, we saw a slowing of increase in wages. So we're starting to go there. Slowing retail sales, we've already seen that. We saw a drop in consumer spending in January and lower consumer confidence. We are definitely seeing that. So kind of the way that I would sort of characterize this today, Major, is the data does not say we are in a recession. However, consumer sentiment might say that we are heading for one. And that's really important because consumer sentiment impacts how consumers will spend. And that really drives 2/3 of GDP.
We always get smarter when you're around, Kelly O'Grady. Thank you very, very much. I want to bring in CBS News political director Finn Gomez and that's from News of the U.S. reporter Evan McMorris Santoro. Evan, it's great to have you here. Thanks. You guys have done a lot of really interesting and important reporting on Elon Musk, Department of Government Efficiency, lawmakers being surprised about things that are being done there, layoffs. That fits into suddenly this broader conversation about the health of the U.S. economy, does it not?
That's exactly right. I mean, one of the things that Trump really pulled off when he won this last election was to capture that working class vote. These are the folks who are going to be sort of on the line here, that if the economy does take a tank, if we do see unemployment go up, they're the ones who are going to be the most affected. And meanwhile, the administration spent a lot of time, its early months, right, cutting a lot of the agencies that those people might end up relying on when things get down. So it's a tough political spot to be in to say, don't worry, the richest man in the world is cutting a bunch of stuff that you might need at this exact moment.
Or that you're a federal contractor you might be a recipient of. Or you might be a federal employee who spends money that goes to a small business that a Trump supporter owns and operates.
And I think it's important to note that there are a lot of Republicans who are starting to see this, right? We are seeing a lot of Republicans start to complain about the impact on universities in their state, other major employers like that.
The constituent phone calls are real.
That's right.
That they're not AstroTurf, that they're not paid Democratic activists, that there's actually some genuine pushback in their districts, and they're needing to say something about that.
That's what we're hearing. I mean, when you see the way they talk about it, they're not talking about it like Democrats are calling us. They're saying this is the people who own these businesses or run these universities that employ a lot of people in our state. They're the ones who are annoyed. And this is the problem, is that with an economic changing situation, how is this White House going to maintain that support among that working class in a situation where things are becoming very, very topsy-turvy economically?
Finn, based on your knowledge, is this becoming a combustible issue within the Trump cabinet with Elon?
It has been. We have some of our own reporting that confirms some of Maggie Haberman's reporting from the New York Times from last week, showcasing there was that sort of back and forth between Elon and some of the other
kind of a low-level shouting match.
Absolutely.
Not screaming, but pushing back and forth across the table in a cabinet meeting.
Exactly. And I would note, I mean, we talked about this earlier before, that my 401k has taken a massive hit, as many people today. I've not looked at it. I think Evan is looking at it. Told me not to look at it, but I did anyway.
We will play a funeral during emerge for that at some point here in the near future.
Can you imagine, like some of the cabinet members we know are in the billionaire class. They're worth a lot. Can you imagine the amount of money they've lost personally just on what's happening today? Like I spoke to a senior congressional Democrat earlier today who says, like, we talked a lot about the lack of unity, the sort of confusion on that side of the aisle. They say that this now has given them essentially a political gift, an opening here where they can focus on the economy if it continues this way and say the dreaded R word, as we've heard that today. But also, as Evan said, talk about these working class voters that we saw so many of them in droves go to Trump back in November. So politically, they feel that this is something that can unite the caucus and frankly, and allow them to hit back against Trump.
I want to show a couple of full screens here that are interesting about Ukraine and about Elon Musk and what he's willing to say on X. So the first one is Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, just left Ukraine. What I saw proved to me we can't give up on the Ukrainian people. Everyone wants this war to end, but any agreement has to protect Ukraine's security and can't be a giveaway to Putin. Kind of an anodyne, ordinary statement. Elon Musk responds, at Senator Mark Kelly, you are a traitor. Finn, what is traitorous about what I just read from Mark Kelly?
Well, politics aside, Senator Kelly is both Republicans and Democrats have called him an American hero. He was a former Navy combat pilot and an astronaut, man. So his colleague, Senator Gallego of Arizona, the junior senator of Arizona, came out with a tweet just a little while ago saying that, saying that same thing, saying Elon Musk is trying to fire 80,000 people from the VA. Only one of these guys is a traitor. Hint, it's the one who's never been to space. And that's specifically Elon Musk. And look, again, politically, to call Mark Kelly a traitor, it feels like it's you crossing.
And Evan, this is not going to calm the waters. The waters that Elon is roiling.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, you can get away with this stuff when everybody's having a good time, right? The question for this administration
when you're an outsider, you're just sort of popping off on X, which seems like that's all anyone ever does there anymore.
Well, I mean, I want to go back to this idea of this being like a gift to Democrats. The challenge is that this economy issue has reared up and bitten the last administration and maybe be biting this administration, right? And when that bite happens, a lot of things that seemed really fun to talk about and do suddenly become really unfun to talk about and do. And so this is a real challenge for this administration is that, Donald Trump is a pretty good speaker for the things that he wants to speak about. He's very good at connecting with his voters, connecting with his folks that he's brought into the party, and he has this guy Elon running around saying his stuff. And the question is this what Trump wants to say? Is it not what Trump wants to say? Right now, so far, Elon's been given a lot of leash to say what he wants to say. But we have all seen this, over all the years we've seen this, that the moment that turns, that leash gets pulled really, really fast. And the question is, when is that going to happen? Is it when you're calling a senator who's an astronaut a traitor in the middle of an economic downturn, or is it something else? But either way, it does not seem to be going in a direction that I've ever seen working out well in the end.
Exactly. When the bite draws blood, things change, and rarely for the better. Evan McMorris-Santoro from Notice and Finn Gomez with CBS News. Thank you very much. After a 6-week review, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says 83% of programs funded by USAID, that's U.S. Agency for International Development, have been canceled. What that means for the future of U.S. foreign assistance. You are watching America Decides. Welcome back. This morning, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced cancellation of 83% of USAID, that's the United States Agency for International Development programs. Rubio went on to say the remaining programs, some 1,000, will now be run under the supervision of the State Department. He also went out of his way to thank Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency for pointing out areas of cost cutting. For more, I want to bring in Raj Kumar and Samantha Vinograd. Sam, CBS News national security contributor. Raj is the president and editor-in-chief of DevEx, which covers global development. Raj, what's left?
Not much, and we don't actually know which programs are remaining and which are canceled. The administration has run this in a very chaotic way. I'm not sure they know which programs are remaining. And it's interesting because we'd like to see when they say life-saving programs have been retained. Well, what does that mean exactly?
How do you define that?
How do you define that? So many of the ways they've described USAID since the start of this administration have been really foreign to those of us who work in this field. We cover it as a news organization. We broke the story that they were stopping work across USAID programs. And honestly, Major, it doesn't sit, the way they describe the agency doesn't sound anything like the agency that we cover every day, right? They describe it as a criminal organization.
All sorts of corrupt contracts.
Exactly. And Marco Rubio today saying that, hey, this 83% of programs, they don't align with America's interests. These are programs that he and other members of Congress voted for. They created, they earmarked. So it's a little hard to understand what do they really mean at this point.
So we don't know what's left. Sam, do we know what's gone?
We do know what's gone. We know that USAID historically has had about 10,000 personnel. Two-thirds of those personnel have been deployed overseas to about 60 different offices. We know that the vast majority of those personnel have been fired or put on some sort of leave. We also know that they're not just cutting personnel and cutting money. They're also subsuming USAID within the State Department itself, Major. And I'll note, I've worked under 3 presidents. Every president has viewed USAID a little bit differently based on its status. For example, Biden gave the director of USAID a seat at the National Security Council table, which was new. But now we're just seeing USAID as an entity really go away and the State Department exert ownership of the remaining 17% or so of contracts. And you think, USAID had a $40 billion budget or so in fiscal year 2023. The majority of that was for humanitarian assistance in places like Ukraine, Ethiopia, and Jordan. And now what's left, as Raj said, is whatever the administration decides is life-saving. But that's quite objective in the development context.
And Raj, what does that mean bureaucratically that it's in State Department now? How does that change both the mission and how it's measured?
Yeah, look, what USAID is fundamentally, it's a procurement agency. They're supposed to buy stuff. That's it.
And then moves them to places in the world where they're needed.
You got it.
Whether that's to deal with AIDS, Ebola, malnutrition, measles, education,
agriculture, right? And the State Department is not a procurement agency. They don't have these resources. So as they have laid off, as Sam says, thousands of the people who have that expertise, they now need to bring it into the State Department. So it doesn't feel so much like a reform. It's more of a political takeover. A lot of people wonder, is it even legal? And it's an open question, right? This is an agency that was created as an independent agency by the U.S. Congress. Can the administration just shrink it and absorb it into state? It's kind of an open question. I think it's going to be in the courts to decide that. Is it a smart idea? Also kind of an open question. It may not be any more efficient. Marco Rubio says that in his tweet, that they're going to make it more efficient by bringing in the State Department. I don't know that there's real evidence that that's the case. If you look at the United Kingdom or Canada or Australia, which have done similar things in the last decade or so, it's kind of a mixed bag as to whether this saves the taxpayer any money at all.
Sam, are we sort of dancing around an uncomfortable reality that it's basically dead?
I think today, based upon, Raj and I are on the board of Save the Children together, we're seeing the direct impact of these cuts on nonprofits and other implementing partners. Yes, Major, it does feel like U.S. development assistance is dying, and very purposefully so. Not because of fiscal constraints in countries in Europe, for example, as Raj and I were discussing before the show, but because this administration does not view U.S. foreign assistance as a national security tool. Whereas when I worked in Iraq, when I worked overseas, USAID was always around not because it felt good to help people, but because it helped advance U.S. national security interests to save lives, to help spur economic growth so that the economies around the world were healthy. This administration fundamentally does not think that foreign assistance helps advance U.S. national security.
And Raj, isn't it true that back in the day in the Cold War, USAID was a kind of interesting eyes and ears off the books for lots of other interested national security parties within the federal government?
Yeah, a long time back, there was some of that. But honestly,
little skullduggery going on now. I'm going in there for charity stuff, but actually they were handing off information to the CIA and others.
There was some of that a long, long time back. But more recently, really, it's a program that wins hearts and minds. And it's
at least tries to.
At least tries to. And has been characterized as, saving a lot of lives in Africa from HIV, AIDS, et cetera. It hasn't really had that national security angle other than to say the U.S. government has an entryway.
To burnish the
burnish
the image of the United States.
Develop those relationships. And the way it's being closed down, there's a legitimate debate about what should happen to it, but the way it's being closed down is going to really hurt those relationships because it's a sudden cutoff of programs.
And allow
and
others to
funding.
move in. I mean, we're seeing other countries step in where we used to be like our adversaries to show the U.S. can't be depended on.
Sam Vinograd, Raj Kumar, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Thanks. Prominent Palestinian activist who led student protests at Columbia University arrested this weekend by ICE. Why the Syrian-born immigrant, now a permanent resident, could face deportation. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. A Palestinian activist who helped lead protests at Columbia University last year over the Israel-Hamas war has been arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Mahmoud Khalil was taken into custody this weekend following an order from the State Department. Khalil has permanent resident status in the United States. President Trump posted on social media today saying, quote, "This is the first arrest of many to come." CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez is following this story for us. Camila, what's the latest?
Well, Major, the Department of Homeland Security confirmed to CBS News that ICE did indeed arrest Khalil over the weekend and that it did so pursuant to executive actions issued by President Trump. They include orders that have demanded that the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security target foreign nationals on colleges and universities who are deemed to promote, endorse, or otherwise support terrorist organizations. And the Department of Homeland Security is claiming in a statement that Khalil has led activities that are in support of Hamas, which of course, as you know, Major, is considered to be a terrorist organization. The exact nature and details of those alleged activities remain unclear. What we do know is that U.S. immigration law, Major, does give the president and the government writ large wide-ranging and sweeping authorities to seek the deportation of non-citizens, including lawful permanent residents from the U.S. on national security and terrorism-related grounds, which is something that could be invoked in this case potentially. We do not know of any criminal charges or convictions related to this case, but we do know, according to a system, that people whose relatives are in ICE custody, that Khalil right now is being detained at an ICE detention facility in Louisiana. Major?
The ACLU has said that this violates Khalil's First Amendment rights. The support for terrorist organizations has historically been defined as material support, meaning financial or otherwise. Is there anything beyond speech that is implicated here with this arrest?
It's unclear, Major, but U.S. immigration law is actually pretty sweeping in its language regarding terrorism-related deportation grounds. It says that if anyone who is deemed to endorse or support and promote terrorism activities, that person could be placed in deportation proceedings. So it is not just limited, rather, to material technical support to a terrorist group. It could be that migrants and immigrants who are here legally or illegally are deported because they are deemed to endorse or promote terrorism activities, Major.
Pivoting to another topic, Camilo, the Trump administration is retooling an immigration app previously used by the Biden administration, and perhaps retooling doesn't go quite far enough to describe the big changes. What are they?
That's right. So in 2023, the Biden administration used this government smartphone app known as CBP-1 to allow people in Mexico, migrants, Major, to request a time to be processed at an official border crossing along the U.S.-Mexico border so they could pursue asylum inside of the U.S. at a later date. The Biden administration allowed more than 1 million migrants into the U.S. under that process. The Trump administration quickly terminated that system and canceled all appointments under the app, but it is now converting that app, otherwise known as CBP-1, into CBP Home, which will allow migrants who are here illegally and unlawfully to notify officials that they intend to voluntarily depart from the country, what the government would call a self-deportation. And that is something that the Trump administration has been intensely encouraging migrants to do, to self-deport from the country, because otherwise, officials warn, the migrants will be found, arrested, deported and exiled from the country indefinitely.
Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you very much. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.